Hi, everybody. I'm super excited today. Here we are meeting Moira Hough, who is a PhD on environmental science. She's been studying ecology, evolutionary biology, and she's working on the University of Arizona. So she have a lot of things to tell us, and especially we are facing our generation is facing a big problem with carbon. Our emissions are big, and she's been studying a lot on that. So she will probably illustrate us on this subject. So hi, Maura, how are you doing?
Hi, Kilian. I'm good. I'm excited to be here and get to talk a little bit about science, which I love talking about.
Yes, I think it's very important for everybody to know science because our actions should be supported by science. It's how we can do things better, how we can do things that they have a bigger impact, and that's so cool to talk with scientists like you. So we know better when we do something that we are doing on the right direction. So actually, what's your background? How did you end up studying the soil and the carbon capture in the Arctic?
Yeah, that's a great question. It was not a super direct road, but yeah, it started out, as a young child being really interested in plants and animals, what was going on around me. I had the advantage of my father worked in conservation, and so we lived when I was young in some really interesting places like Madagascar that has a lot of unique plants and animals, and we're in the Serengeti in Tanzania, and again, I would see giraffes out the window, which I think it's very hard not to be fascinated by the environment when you have that background. But then I was always asking questions about, well, why is this the way it is? Why is it that the trees I see on that hillside don't grow on this other hillside? Why is it that it's always much colder in the dips and warmer on top of the hills? And then you see different plants growing there. So it started with just questioning and wanting to know how everything works. And then as I went through to university, I wanted to study ecology, study the environment. And I got really interested in understanding carbon because it's like this, unseen force that's tying everything together. So we as humans, we breathe in and out the air. We eat food that's made out of carbon. We use that to break it apart, make energy, do whatever it is we do, and then breathe it out as carbon dioxide. Then the plants take in that carbon dioxide, they use it to grow, they produce energy, and then that energy we either eat or it can go into the soil. And when it goes into the soil, that's when it gets really interesting because then it either stays there and forms this reservoir of carbon in the soil, which is super interesting, or it decomposes. And so you have all these little microbes and insects and fungi that are consuming all of that plant material, releasing carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere. And so it's connecting everything, but also forming this really essential backdrop to the climate change problem. So this is, kind of the natural carbon cycle that's all around us all the time, that we are now as humans modifying it. And that is where we're seeing, of course, very big climate changes taking place already, especially in some of our more sensitive ecosystems. So I really wanted to understand how is this all working, and is there anything we can do with natural systems to try and mitigate what's going on with climate change?
Yeah, that's super interesting, and because we are hearing like about carbon and the problem of carbon in the atmosphere, but we need to realize first that carbon is also life. That we need carbon to be alive, or plants, or like all the species, all the animals need carbon to be alive. So it's about the balance. Probably it's more about the balance with carbon that it's in the capture in the soil and it's in the atmosphere and it's on these exchanges. And actually, as you mentioned, the soil it's very important. It's a place that it captures carbon and it has a big role on this balance on carbon in the planet. So I think that that's kind of a discovery for many of us because we often think like soil it's rocks, sand, and it has not a proper life, is nothing like a very important. But the role of soil and the quality of the soil, it's probably one of the things that we should care the most for the health of the planet and for the future.
Yeah, exactly. And it's something that you can observe every time you go outside. If you're walking, when you feel that really nice, springy, soft ground that you love to run on because it's just so soft and comfortable, that's really organic rich, carbon rich soil. And when you're on that really hard packed sand, that really doesn't have a lot of carbon. So you can tell just moving and being out in the world that there's more carbon in some soils and less in other soils. And that's really, really important for our climate regulation because in some conditions, that carbon really gets stored. So when it's really cold, when it's really wet, it's very hard for it to decompose. But then as conditions change, as it warms up, the microbes can become a lot more active, and there is this possibility that these really rich places with a lot of carbon can have a lot of decomposition, and that carbon gets released to the atmosphere as carbon dioxide, and it makes the whole problem worse. But then we also have options of how to manage ecosystems. And if we can make decisions about, well, I'm going to try and manage my system so that I increase the amount of carbon that's getting stored. And that's one way that we can try and take a little bit of carbon out of the atmosphere and put it in the soil and keep it there as a reservoir that's not warming our atmosphere.
Yes, actually, that's super interesting. I has been reading a bit about the cycle of rocks, and it's some experimentation on like doing artificially like to break rocks so they capture the CO2 in the atmosphere, and so it stores in the soil. And I believe that these kind of solutions, they might be interesting because uh, with the emissions that we produce as humans, the balance is not there. So we need probably not only to reduce our emissions in carbon, but also like we need to accelerate this capture of the CO2 that is in the atmosphere, and probably we can do it through technology, but maybe some natural systems, as you mentioned, they are more efficient, and probably trying to accelerate this capture on the soil or to manage better the soil capture might be one of the possible solutions.
Yeah, exactly. And it's all about figuring out what speeds up carbon going into the soil and what speeds up carbon going out of the soil. So, if you have plants that are growing a lot and very rapidly putting a lot of litter, a lot of leaves into the soil, that's great. That's carbon going in and being taken out of the atmosphere. If you can do something to slow down the decomposition, then that's carbon that's staying there in the soil. And we have a lot of ecosystems. So wetlands are a great example where decomposition is just really slow because there's very little oxygen. And that slows everything down. And there's a lot of carbon stored in them. If we can keep them as wetlands stored that way, we can keep carbon in the soil. But as soon as we start draining wetlands, which often happens for agriculture or because people want to build cities or for any reason, now you're exposing all of that carbon to oxygen and it can decompose a lot faster. And so now you're potentially taking this nice reservoir of carbon out of the soil and putting it into the atmosphere. So, yeah, like you say, we have a lot of control, but depending on how we choose to manage these systems, um, or even agriculture, if you have a crop system where you maintain a cover crop, so you have plants that you're growing all the time on top of the soil, that prevents erosion and that will help to keep carbon in the soil. Whereas if you don't, then you'll be always losing the carbon from the soil.
Yeah, that's interesting, as you mentioned, like agriculture. It's kind of a big topic now when we talk about environment, like how managing like the type of agriculture it can change a lot of things on the. It goes behind probably the soil, but also it's very important how we manage this soil, so it captures and it captures better the carbon, and it don't releases. And also you mentioned like cities and probably like when we build things, we are probably like, yeah, taking away some of this surface that is not naturally like capturing the carbon. So yeah, it's when we think about building or like expanding a city, it's also part of that. And agriculture, like when we talk about agriculture, you mentioned a bit, but what are the difference? Like what types of agriculture are would be better for preserving this the carbon in the soil?
Yeah, so it's really, it depends a lot on where you are, of course. So, it's going to be different if you're in an area where you're growing corn versus you're in an area where you are raising cattle or something. But in general, we think about if it's say you're growing a lot of corn plants. Like I say, maintaining some plants on top of the soil. If you have a period where normally your fields go fallow, so there wouldn't be anything growing. If you plant something there, it just keeps the soil in place and prevents erosion. Or if some people will add mulch to the soil. So you harvest your corn, you take the parts we eat, and then you take the rest of the stalk and you can put it back into the soil. And that can help to build up the carbon. Or if you have cattle on a rangeland, a more grassland system, then it tends to be thinking about, okay, how many cows per area? How are they compacting the soil? Are you making sure that the grasses can survive and um, grow and regrow year to year so that some of that material is staying in the soil? Those are some of the big things that we think about.
And as you mentioned, is about having some plants in the soil. So probably desertification is one of the accelerators of the carbon emissions. So it's it's a positive feedback on on the emissions because we are like getting warmer, so it's more desertification. So it probably means that it's accelerating these emissions, these natural emissions, not only the ones from the cars and from the industry, but also the ones that they are already in the soil. So that's yeah, it's kind of a negative when I'm thinking that is like, wow, that we are kind of very bad. Like it's just like getting worse, and it's everything in this positive feedback that it's hard to stop. But yeah, yeah, it's kind of depressing in a way, but I'm sure that it's also possible to turn around in the other direction.
It is. Yeah. Like you say, it can be very depressing because we're not going in a good direction. But I think we have options. And this is some of where I think thinking about soil carbon is very exciting because that's where we have the most, in my view, the most options for making a difference. So some of the good news is that as it warms up, plants tend to grow faster. They grow bigger, they grow more. There's this idea of a carbon dioxide fertilization effect of plants growing better when they have more carbon dioxide available to them because that's their food. So if we can get that growth of plants to be more than the rate of carbon of decomposition from the soil, then we're in good shape. It's all about thinking about it like a bathtub. As long as the rate of the water going into the bathtub is faster than the rate of the water draining out, then you're good. You can build up more and more water in that bathtub, and in this case, carbon in our soil. And so it's something that we can do something about. Obviously, the first choice is we need to cut out the fossil fuel emissions, switch to renewable energies. But we're already seeing climate change happening. And so, one of the best ways that we can slow down that climate change, give us a chance to make those bigger changes, is by thinking about this soil carbon pool. And so again, choices like agriculture, but even individual choices that you and I can make, for an athlete, staying on trail to prevent erosion. That is actually a significant difference that we can make. Talking to other people, letting them know, getting everybody thinking about this is a huge impact that we can have. Because every time we want to do something, it all starts at a local area. You have to start in your backyard, in your home, with your friends, and then that builds to a bigger movement. That's how you get more people involved. So it can feel like we're powerless, but we're not. There are things we can do.
That's good to hear, and I think the tips you did to all of us, they are very interesting, and I think all we can apply on that, and to feel that we have some power to do. It's we yeah we have power as individuals, and probably more we are together, this power it grows, so we can make bigger impacts. And actually, I was reading some of your studies you have been publishing, um, on the Arctic zones. And like I live in Norway, and it's a country that has a big permafrost. So and we have been seeing in the last years, like it's more landslides. It's changing the quality of the soils, and that's very interesting, because it's a big part of the world, in the northern and probably in the southern hemisphere too, where it's a lot of land that still have permafrost, but this permafrost will probably, or it's disappearing now, and that makes some changes, for housing, for how like natural disasters like landslides and roads and things breaking, but also, and that I didn't know at all. It was like, it's a lot of carbon down there that it can also release
Yeah,
when this
absolutely.
permafrost is
So
melting.
my main field site is actually in Abisko in Sweden, not so far from you. And it's a great study site because it's right on that edge where permafrost is thawing. And yes, permafrost soils, they have a huge amount of carbon in them. You know, it's up to, they figure up to, 30% of the amount of carbon that is in the soil in the globe is found in permafrost regions. So even though it's not a huge land area, it's a huge amount of carbon. Um, so one of the concerns is, okay, as it warms up, like you say, the ecosystems are changing, the soil collapses, you get a huge change in the plants that can grow, and in how people can use the land. And one of our concerns is that that carbon can decompose and get added in back into the atmosphere. So one of the things we are studying is how big a risk is that? And the answer is it's surprisingly complicated. And there could be some good news in that you have a shift in which plants grow. So sometimes you end up with these much more active, faster growing plant communities that actually take some carbon out of the atmosphere, and that's great news. The problem is you also sometimes end up with the formation of these wetlands where, I said wetlands are good because they store carbon, and they do, but they also produce methane gas because when you have a completely wet inundated system, that you have a shift in the type of decomposition that happens, and that produces methane, which is about 25 times more potent as a greenhouse gas as carbon dioxide. So what we as scientists are trying to figure out is how does all of this balance out? Okay, so you have more carbon uptake, you have more carbon storage, but you have more potent greenhouse gases being released. What is the balance effect? And it's complicated. We're still trying to understand exactly what it will be because it depends on exactly what is the temperature. How do the microbes in the soil respond to that change in temperature? When you have the change in the plant types, does that also change decomposition rate? And yes, but the bottom line is that right now there is a risk that thawing permafrost can be this really big feedback, making climate change worse. But we don't know for sure how bad it will be, or if for sure it will be terrible. So we need to understand better.
Yeah, and that's why it's important to support science and to keep update on science, because it's knowledge. Like it's not only like humans with our cars or industry. Like we we send CO2 in the atmosphere. It's not only that. It's a lot of other things. And as you mentioned, how we don't know everything, and that's why we need to keep supporting science so we know what can be the challenges that we will be facing in the near future, and what are those solutions that you've been talking about. And I think we will need to do a catch out soon when the research is it's going, and when you are finding more results on that, because it's so exciting, and it's something that as an athlete, as a person, I didn't know that it was this amount of carbon under the permafrost, and how difficult it is to understand, because as you mentioned, wetlands and plants, they have different roles, and we don't know exactly what will happen, but that's probably it's scary in a way, but it's exciting too, because probably it might bring other solutions to it, might bring other possibilities to reduce the global warming. But maybe the best and the easiest solution is to try to keep as much
That would be the
permafrost
best
it is
option, yes.
before it melt, right? Yeah. Yeah, so just to finish, and like you already mentioned it, like what we can do as individual actions, all of us, we can have an impact. But what will be your thing, like to say, guys, if we can make a
Yeah,
difference,
I think that there
where
are kind of two
where
levels
we
of
should
that. One
start?
is, as a society, how could, we as individuals, we can vote, we can decide who is in charge of making policies, and we as a society can make policies to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, to be more careful about how we use land. But then there are also, more hands-on things that we can do as individuals. And so I mentioned, staying on trail, preventing erosion. And that really is a real thing. We have areas where there's a lot of erosion and you have a lot of soil carbon loss. And then we have getting involved. If there's a local conservation agency, if there is a wetland in your backyard that you know about, you can get involved that way. And like I say, every climate change is a global problem, but also a local problem. Every little thing we do builds, and you have to start somewhere. So that's another thing. As as extreme outdoor athletes, one thing is to get involved with science. Often scientists want to know, hey, I want samples from this mountaintop. I can't get there. I do not have those skills, but maybe someone else, maybe you do. And I think there's actually a real role for collaboration there to get involved and get the right samples to the right people at the right time. Um, so I think that that's one potential. But then most of all, just talking to people, forming a community, forming an understanding of what's going on, and that progress and change needs to happen, and that's how it will happen, is getting people on board.
Thank you very much, Maura. And we keep the note, if it's some athletes that they want to take a notebook or to take some samples in the mountains, to get in touch with scientists. Maybe we should launch something like that. I think that could be something interesting to put in contact athletes and scientists, so we can help, first as a personal interest, to understand better science, to understand better our world, and secondly to help finding samples, or in different ways. So thank you very much, Moira, for this chat. And yeah, it's so cool. Like we are learning so much every day, and I think that makes us better athletes, and to because a better athlete, I believe, is also the one that wants to protect the playground where we are running or skiing or climbing, and that's thanks to all the scientists that you are telling us how is this environment and how we can protect it better.
Cool. Thank you.